What if I told you that one of the most pivotal moments in Sri Lankan history, it all came down to a kingdom that barely lasted a single lifetime? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of the Dambadeniya Kingdom. This is a story about a forgotten power, born out of total catastrophe, that somehow managed to save an entire civilization from the brink.
So you have to understand, the Dambadeniya Kingdom, it wasn't born from some grand ambition for glory or expansion. Not at all. Its very existence was a desperate, frantic answer to a terrifying question. How on earth does a culture survive its own apocalypse? This wasn't about conquering. It was about just holding on, holding on against absolutely overwhelming odds. A veritable reign of terror. Just let that sink in. That's how the old chronicles described the event that made this kingdom necessary in the first place. We're not just talking about a war or a simple change of dynasty here. This was a calculated, brutal invasion aimed at systematically shattering a civilization that had stood for more than 1,000 years. So to really get this, you have to know that every story of rebirth, well, it starts with a story of collapse. Before Dambadeniya, there was the great Polonnaruwa kingdom, but by 1215, it was really just a shadow of its former self, already weakened by decades of infighting. And that's exactly when a conqueror named Kalinga arrived from India, ready to just push the whole thing over the edge. 24,000 soldiers. Think about that. That was the size of the ruthless mercenary army Kalinga unleashed on the island. But the true horror of his 21-year rule wasn't just the military conquest. No, it was the devastating ideology that was fueling the whole thing. See, this was so much more than an invasion. It was a cultural war. Maha was smart. He understood that to truly break the Sinhalese people, he had to break their faith. He wasn't just trying to rule them, he was trying to erase the very foundation of their power, which was just so deeply intertwined with Buddhism. His forces went around, systematically ransacking temples, destroying religious institutions. They were striking right at the heart of the kingdom's identity. And the result? Well, it was a cataclysm. An entire civilization was just uprooted. People fled the northern heartland, abandoning these ancient, magnificent cities and their amazing irrigation systems. But, and this is so important, as they ran, the monks carried with them the kingdom's last hope. They took the two most sacred symbols of sovereignty, the tooth and bowl relics, and hid them deep in the mountains, away from the chaos. But even in the deepest darkness, a spark of resistance can ignite. And out of all that chaos in the southwest, a new leader emerged, a local chieftain named Vijayabahu III. He knew the old world was gone for good. To survive, they were going to need a whole new strategy, a whole new kind of kingdom. And just look at the contrast here. It's so stark. The old kingdoms, they were built on these huge, expansive, fertile plains. But Vijayabahu, he chose his new capital, Dambadeniya, for a totally different reason. Its sheer defensibility. It was built around this massive fortified rock. The game had completely changed. Survival now meant defense, not expansion. And wealth, that was going to come from the sea, from trade, not just from the land anymore. But okay, a fortress alone couldn't save them. Vijayabahu knew that. He knew that real power, it lay in legitimacy. So he embarked on this really methodical quest to rebuild the religious and symbolic authority that Maga had tried so hard to shatter. What was his first move? Win the loyalty of all those scattered monks, find out where the hidden relics were, and bring back the symbols of kingship. And this was the masterstroke. By recovering those relics, Vijayabahu laid the absolute cornerstone of his new kingdom. It sent this powerful message across the entire island to a scattered and terrified population that basically said, the chaos is over. A rightful, divinely sanctioned king has returned. All right, so the foundation was laid, but it was Vijayabahu's son, Parakramabahu II, who would build on it and take this new fortress kingdom to its absolute peak. This guy was a rare combination, He was a formidable warrior on the battlefield and a renowned scholar in the courts. On the battlefield, he was an absolute force. He didn't just defend, he went on the attack. He's the one who finally drove Kalinga out of the north, ending that reign of terror once and for all. And when a new threat popped up, this Malayan ruler named Chandrabanu, who was obsessed with capturing the sacred tooth relic, Parakramabahu fought him off not once but twice. But, wars are expensive. So how did he fund all these campaigns? Well, he doubled down on his father's economic vision. The old agricultural wealth of the north? Gone. So he turned to the sea. He leveraged Dambadeniya's strategic position to tap into the booming, incredibly lucrative trade routes of the Indian Ocean. But for all his military skill, his greatest legacy, it wasn't forged in battle. It was written in verse and prose. His reign sparked what's called a golden era of Sinhalese literature. And this wasn't just about art for art's sake, it was a deliberate state project. To truly restore the faith that Maga had tried to extinguish, he sponsored the translation of sacred texts and histories into the common Sinhala language, making them accessible to a whole new generation. And get this wasn't just a king commissioning art from the sidelines. Parakramabahu was a scholar and a poet in his own right, so prolific that he earned this incredible title, the omniscient scholar in all arts and literature of the age. He personally wrote works like the poetic masterpiece, the Kausalyuya. This just proves that for him, cultural revival wasn't just policy, it was a deep personal passion. But here lies the tragedy of Dambadeniya. The kingdom's stability, its military might, its cultural brilliance, all of it rested on the shoulders of one remarkable man. And when he was gone, the entire structure didn't just weaken, it unraveled with shocking, fatal speed. So his son, Vijayabahu IV, was a pious and modest ruler, but he was just no match for the treachery of the court. Just 2 years into his reign, he was assassinated by one of his own ministers. And just like that, in an instant, the kingdom was plunged right back into the deadly infighting his father had so masterfully suppressed. So the next king, Bhuvanekabahu I, takes power, and his very first act speaks volumes. He abandons Dambadeniya, the very fortress his grandfather had built as a symbol of defiance, because he considered it too insecure. He flees to an even more remote, defensive location. It was a crystal-clear sign. The kingdom was terrified and it was crumbling from within. And, in the ruthless world of international politics, internal weakness is basically a fatal invitation. All that chaos did not go unnoticed. The kingdom's powerful neighbors and, former allies were watching, and they were waiting. The blow came in 1284, and the worst part? It came from a former friend, the Pandyan Kingdom from South India. The very power Parakramabahu had used as an ally to defeat his enemies, they saw their chance. The alliance was over. Now they came not as friends, but as conquerors. The Pandyan army sacked the new fortress of Yapuha and seized the ultimate prize. They knew exactly what to take. With the capture of the tooth relic, the physical symbol of sovereignty itself was gone. It was the ultimate political disaster. So Dambadeniya rises from the ashes, reaches this brilliant peak, and then just falls apart in a few decades. It's a whirlwind. So why does this short-lived, fragmented kingdom matter so much? Really, what should you take away from all this? Well, despite its tragic, swift end, Dambadeniya's legacy was just immense. Politically, it reforged that sacred, unbreakable link between the king, the monks, and the holy relics. Culturally, it pretty much saved the faith by translating it into the language of the people. Geographically, it managed a permanent shift of the Sinhalese heartland to the southwest. And ideologically, it created a whole new blueprint for survival, this model of defensive consolidation that would allow the civilization to endure in a dangerous new world. So, even though its ruins might be less monumental than the ancient capitals, historians see it as something far more important. It was that indispensable bridge that allowed an entire culture to survive its own apocalypse. It's the reason that the legacy of a 1,500-year-old civilization was not erased, but was instead reborn.